On a cold January day in 2000, a frail young woman stepped out of a second-story bedroom in a quiet Niigata home and into the outside world for the first time in 9 years. 19-year-old Fusako Sano could barely walk and squinted in the daylight she hadn't seen since childhood. Moments later, in the corridor of a local hospital, she approached police officers and spoke the words everyone had longed to hear. She was the girl who had vanished almost a decade ago. Her reappearance was as sudden and shocking as her disappearance years earlier, and it unraveled one of the most haunting kidnapping cases Japan has ever seen. But how did this even happen? Fusako Sano was a bright fourth grader from the rural city of Sanjo in Niigata Prefecture. On November 13, 1990, 9-year-old Fusako spent the afternoon watching a school baseball game near her elementary school, a routine activity in her close-knit community. As dusk fell and the cheering faded, Fusako vanished without a trace. One moment, she was walking home along familiar streets. The next, she was gone. The disappearance of a child in a small town sent waves of panic through the community. Neighbors and police scoured the area, combing rice fields and riversides in a desperate search. A large police operation was launched, and posters bearing Fusako's smiling face were pinned up on walls and telephone poles. Rumors swirled as days turned into weeks, with no sign of the little girl. Some feared the worst, and even proposed far-fetched theories. In an era when Japan was grappling with mysterious abductions of its citizens, investigators considered the possibility that Fusako might have been kidnapped by North Korean agents, a scenario once deemed conceivable, however unlikely. Yet, as winter set in, no clues emerged. It was as if Fusako Sano had disappeared into thin air. Her family refused to give up hope. Despite the lack of leads, Fusako's parents held on to the belief that their daughter was alive somewhere. They kept her school uniform neatly folded and her room ready, praying for her return. Year after year, on her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance, they renewed public appeals and quietly told themselves that Fusako was out there, waiting to come home. But as the 1990s wore on, hope was increasingly hard to sustain. For nearly a decade, the people of Sanjo lived under a cloud of uncertainty and fear, haunted by the unanswered question, what happened to Fusako Sano? What no one in Sanjo knew was that on that November afternoon, Fusako had fallen into the hands of a stranger just minutes after leaving the baseball game. As she walked along a street near her school, a man approached. 28-year-old Nobuyuki Sato, an unemployed local resident known to have mental disturbances. In a sudden attack, Sato threatened the little girl at knife point. Terrified, Fusako couldn't even scream. Sato bound the 9-year-old with tape, silencing her cries, and forced her into the trunk of his car. Sato drove out of Sanjo under cover of darkness. Incredibly, his destination was not some remote hideout, but his own home in a residential area of Kashiwazaki City, just 55 kilometers away from where Fusako had been taken. The house belonged to Sato's family. It was an unremarkable 2-story home, only 200 meters from a local koban. In this ordinary neighborhood, a horrific secret was about to take root. Sato dragged the bound girl upstairs to his bedroom on the second floor. The door was closed behind them. From that moment, Fusako Sano simply vanished from the outside world. Back in Sanjo, police efforts in the early days focused on the usual leads, checking known sex offenders, interviewing witnesses from the baseball game, and setting up roadblocks. Yet, amazingly, Nobuyuki Sato never fell under suspicion at the time. The authorities did not connect him to the case, even though Sato had a criminal history that made him a logical suspect. It later emerged that in June 1989, just the year before Fusako's abduction, Sato had been arrested and convicted for attempting to kidnap another young girl. He was on probation in 1990, a known kidnapper living in the same prefecture, but due to a lapse in communication between local police departments, Sato's name somehow disappeared from the list of criminals under consideration. This critical oversight meant that as the search for Fusako raged on, the actual perpetrator was hiding in plain sight. Sato's house and his imprisoned victim were a mere 600 yards from a local police station in Kashiwazaki, yet no officers came to his door. For Fusako, the first hours in captivity must have been petrifying. According to what she later told investigators, she was initially tied up for months after the abduction. Sato ruled his upstairs domain with threats and violence, determined to break the child's will and ensure her silence. He showed Fusako a line of masking tape on the floor and warned her never to cross it or make a sound when he wasn't in the room. If he caught her on the wrong side of a line of masking tape, he would punish her with beatings or a stun gun. A court would later recount his methods. Sato even wielded bizarre forms of control. He was an avid gambler, and he forced Fusako to videotape horse racing programs on TV for him under threat of electric shock if she failed to do so. The room's windows were fitted with blurry, frosted glass, so no passerby could glimpse inside. In this makeshift prison cell, a frightened child was completely at the mercy of her captor. That single cramped bedroom became Fusako's entire universe. Sato shared his own clothes with her, which included baggy men's t-shirts and pants, and unceremoniously chopped off her long black hair to disguise her as a boy or simply keep her appearance changed. He fed her 3 times a day, mostly instant foods or leftovers from meals cooked by his mother downstairs. But as Fusako grew from a child into a teenager, Sato deliberately kept her malnourished. If she started growing taller or stronger, he would reduce or withhold food so that she remained weak and small. The goal was chilling, to make sure she was too frail to ever attempt an escape. The conditions in the room were squalid. There was no toilet or bath upstairs. Fusako would only relieve herself in whatever receptacle was provided, and she was permitted to bathe only very infrequently, when her captor decided. Over the years, grime accumulated and the air grew musty. Fusako's world shrank to that small space with its dingy walls and clutter. She had no friends, no sunlight, and no knowledge of the outside events unfolding beyond her window. While her classmates entered junior high, then high school, experiencing all the milestones of growing up, Fusako spent her adolescence imprisoned, in stasis, a young girl frozen in time. Sato employed a mix of terror and occasional indulgences to maintain control. He often threatened her with a knife and eruptions of rage. When Fusako did not strictly obey, he beat her. At times, he zapped her with a stun gun, inflicting a jolt of pain that left her trembling. But on other occasions, he would act almost casual, leaving the house without even locking the door behind him. Incredibly, over the 9 years of captivity, Fusako later revealed that the door to her room was often not locked at all. Sato had become so confident in her fear and submission, he no longer bothered to physically bar her from leaving. And indeed, Fusako did not run. She had long since ceased trying. Psychologists would later explain that Fusako's reaction was tragically common in long-term hostage situations. Initially, the terrorized girl may have tested the door or thought of screaming for help. But every time she contemplated escape, the memory of violent punishment loomed. In those first months, Sato kept her bound and brutally disciplined until, as Fusako described, she eventually just gave up and accepted her fate. Over time, the will to escape was blunted and beaten out of her. I was too scared to escape and eventually lost the energy to escape, she later told police of her years in captivity. She lived under the constant threat that if she angered Sato or tried to flee, he might kill her. As she confided to investigators, she didn't attempt to run because she feared for her life. Deprived of normal human contact, Fusako's days settled into a bleak routine. She spent endless hours alone in that room. For long stretches, her only company was a small radio that Sato allowed her to have. Through it, she could listen to music or the distant voices of DJs and news announcers, catching faint echoes of a world out of reach. In the evenings, she would sometimes hear the muffled sounds of Sato's mother moving about downstairs, dishes clanking in the kitchen, or the murmur of television from the living room. But Fusako never saw the older woman. Sato's mother lived in the same house, entirely unaware, at least officially, that just above her head, a kidnapped girl was being held prisoner. Whenever the elderly woman dared to climb the stairs toward her son's room, Sato would explode in anger and physically chase her away. He guarded his secret fiercely, even from his own mother. Years passed this way. To Fusako, time must have warped and slowed to a crawl. Seasons changed outside her curtained window, but she only knew them by the temperature in the stifling room. The sticky heat of summers without a fan, the biting cold of Niigata winters when she huddled under thin blankets. She had no calendars, no birthdays or school terms to mark the progression of life. In fact, Fusako later admitted that at some point, she simply stopped counting the days. She retreated into herself, surviving by numbing her mind to her predicament. She watched whatever TV channels her captor allowed. Reportedly, he only permitted her to watch television regularly in the final year of her ordeal. Mostly, she obediently stayed quiet and still, watching endless hours of television game shows or dramas, escaping into those flickering images to forget her own reality. Gradually, the vibrant 9-year-old who had once loved playing sports with friends became a pale, silent ghost of a teenager. As one expert later observed, she was not only contained physically, her soul was also in chains. The crime that Fusako endured was hidden not in a far-off dungeon, but in an ordinary neighborhood where life went on seemingly normal. Sato's 2-story house stood just down the street from local shops and neighbors' homes. Astonishingly, it was less than half a kilometer from a police substation. A constant, if cruel, irony that help was always so close, yet impossibly out of reach. For 9 years, neither neighbors nor authorities uncovered the secret of the quiet Sato household. Neighbors later admitted they found Sato odd. He was a reclusive man, prone to loud outbursts, but they never imagined he might be hiding a kidnapped girl. He seldom interacted with others, and when he did, it sometimes ended in conflict. In one incident, he reportedly got into trouble for harassing schoolgirls and even shoplifting women's underwear, hinting at disturbing behavior that went unaddressed. Yet no one knocked on the door to check on him. Some in Japan would later lament this as a sign of the breakdown of community ties, that even in a small town, neighbors lived parallel lives and didn't intervene or inquire when something seemed amiss. One person did sense something was wrong in that house: Nobuyuki Sato's mother. The elderly woman lived downstairs, directly below the room where Fusako was held. Sato insisted that his mother never go upstairs, and his volatile temper ensured she obeyed. For years, the mother claimed she truly didn't know there was a captive in her home. "I was too scared of him to go in," she later said, referring to her son's upstairs room. However, police grew skeptical of her ignorance. There were subtle signs: occasional thumps or muffled noises from above, an extra plate of food disappearing, or the fact that Sato's mother unwittingly bought items like female sanitary products, which her son had no use for, presumably to supply the hidden girl. Investigators suspect the mother had some inkling that her son was hiding something, but was too afraid to confront the horrifying truth. In a sense, she too may have been a victim of Sato's abusive intimidation. Meanwhile, Fusako's case gradually faded from the headlines. By the late 1990s, her name was mostly known only to her family and the residents of her hometown who still remembered the missing girl. Police had no leads. The file was not closed, but it was cold. Yet, unbeknownst to everyone, there were missed opportunities that could have freed Fusako years earlier. Starting in the mid-1990s, Sato's mental condition was deteriorating. His behavior grew more and more erratic, and he became increasingly violent and unpredictable toward his own mother. Desperate and at wit's end, the mother reached out to social services for help. In 1996, she contacted a local public health center, reporting that her adult son was mentally disturbed and prone to violent outbursts. She didn't mention Fusako. Perhaps she still hadn't seen her, but she pleaded for intervention. A health worker took note, but ultimately the matter did not lead to a thorough inspection of the home. It wasn't until January 2000, 9 years into Fusako's confinement, that Sato's mother tried again, with greater urgency. On January 12, 2000, and again on January 19th, she phoned the public health center, imploring officials to come and visit her home because her son's behavior was out of control. Finally, they listened. A team of welfare officials scheduled a home visit for January 28, 2000. This decision would set in motion a dramatic chain of events that, at long last, cracked open the door to Fusako's freedom. Friday, January 28, 2000, began like any other day in Sato's House of Secrets. By now, Fusako was 19 years old, a young woman, though in many ways still the frightened fourth grader who had been abducted. Sato was agitated that day. Perhaps he knew social workers were coming, or perhaps it was one of his unpredictable mood swings. When officials from the Kashiwazaki Public Health Center arrived at the house that afternoon, Sato quickly lost his temper. He launched into a tirade and began threatening the visiting social workers and his own mother, creating a noisy disturbance. The situation escalated so badly that the alarmed officials decided to call the police for backup. Local police officers rushed to the scene, arriving at the ostensibly ordinary house, not knowing what to expect. They entered to find a chaotic scene. A 37-year-old man in a state of emotional distress, shouting incoherently. The officers moved to restrain the unruly man. This was Nobuyuki Sato, though at that moment they still did not connect him to any larger crime. As they escorted Sato and tried to calm him, a pale, trembling young woman emerged from the shadows of the house. That's when she identified herself as Fusako Sano. The police were stunned. Here was a thin, unkempt teenager claiming to be the child who had vanished 9 years earlier. It seemed impossible, yet Fusako knew details that only the real girl could know. She was immediately taken into protective custody. At the local hospital, the same place Sato had been taken for his outburst, Fusako reaffirmed her identity to the authorities. "I was abducted near the school by a man who forced me into a car," she haltingly told the police, recounting the basic fact of her kidnapping that long-ago day. "For 9 years, I did not take a step out of the house. Today, I went out for the first time." It was a statement that sent chills through everyone who heard it. Investigators later noted that Fusako's tone was strangely matter-of-fact, as if describing someone else's life, a sign of the deep psychological impact of her ordeal. Medical staff who examined Fusako were shocked at her condition. Though she was 19, she weighed only 36 kilograms and appeared much younger. Physically, she was extremely weak. 9 years of confinement with virtually no exercise had left her muscles atrophied. She could barely stand unassisted, let alone walk more than a few steps. Her skin was ghostly pale from lack of sunlight and showed signs of jaundice, a yellowish tinge usually seen in malnourished or chronically ill patients. Doctors found she was also dehydrated and anemic. When doctors tried to engage her, they found that while her body had grown into that of a young woman, her mannerisms and speech were childlike. She had missed virtually all of adolescence locked in that room, and it was as if part of her development had frozen at age 9. News of Fusako Sano's rescue spread like wildfire across Japan. That evening, January 28, 2000, television networks broke into programming with the unbelievable headline, "Missing Girl Found After 9 Years." The nation was stunned and initially skeptical. Could this really be true? But within hours, police confirmed her identity via old records and a birthmark. It was indeed Fusako, the girl whose face had been on missing posters so long ago. For Fusako's family, who had endured 9 agonizing years of not knowing if she was dead or alive, the reunion was like a miracle. At the hospital, her mother rushed in, heart pounding, hardly daring to believe until she saw her child with her own eyes. Fusako, emaciated and drained, managed a faint smile as her mother called out her name and wrapped her in a tearful embrace. Her mother cried out how she had grown, how sorry she was that it took so long. Fusako's father and siblings joined them, weeping with relief. Her mother later admitted that she did not immediately recognize Fusako. The little girl she remembered was now a gaunt young woman, but a mother's intuition soon confirmed that it was her daughter. The family's home, frozen in time since 1990, finally had its missing piece returned. Outside the hospital, crowds of reporters gathered, clamoring for details. How could this have happened? How had a girl been hidden in her own hometown region for 9 years with nobody finding out? The press quickly learned that the suspect was Nobuyuki Sato, the very man police had subdued at the scene. Sato was immediately placed under guard at a psychiatric ward, as authorities said he appeared mentally unstable at the time of arrest. In fact, on the day of the rescue, he was admitted for psychological evaluation rather than thrown directly in jail. The full picture of his crimes and the failings that allowed them would only emerge in the days and weeks ahead. In the aftermath of Fusako's rescue, the wheels of justice began turning to hold Nobuyuki Sato accountable for his crimes. Initially, as Sato was hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, there was uncertainty about whether he could even stand trial. His behavior alternated between sullen silence and inexplicable fits of rage. His lawyers hinted that he suffered from a personality disorder so severe that he might be found legally insane. Nonetheless, Japanese prosecutors were determined to prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. On February 10, 2000, just 2 weeks after Fusako's rescue, Sato's status was changed from mere suspect to formal arrestee, indicating that authorities had gathered enough evidence to charge him. The very next day, February 11th, he was officially arrested and charged with the abduction and unlawful confinement of a minor, among other offenses. The legal process moved relatively swiftly. By May 2000, the Niigata District Court opened Sato's trial. Given the intense public interest in the case, the court took special precautions. Prosecutors carefully managed the presentation of evidence to avoid causing further trauma to Fusako, who fortunately was not required to testify in person about the worst of her experiences. They also bundled in additional minor charges, such as Sato's history of shoplifting women's underwear, aiming to secure the maximum possible prison time. Sato's defense team, as expected, raised the issue of his mental state. They claimed that Sato was mentally incapable and could not be held fully responsible. To resolve this, the court ordered psychiatric examinations. In September 2001, court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that, although deeply disturbed, Nobuyuki Sato was mentally fit to stand trial and knew right from wrong when he committed the crimes. Confronted with overwhelming evidence and now without the shield of an insanity plea, Sato admitted to the court charges, acknowledging that he had indeed kidnapped Fusako and kept her confined all those years. On January 22, 2002, the Niigata District Court delivered its verdict and sentence. The presiding judge, Isu Sakaki, condemned Sato's actions in scathing terms. The victim suffered acute psychological damage, and it remains unknown when, if ever, the after effects will be completely cured, Judge Sakaki declared from the bench. Citing the extreme cruelty and duration of the crime, the court sentenced Nobuyuki Sato to 14 years in prison, just 1 year shy of the maximum 15-year penalty allowed for his charges. He would be in his early 50s by the time of his release, the judge noted, remarking that it was fitting that he spent a significant portion of his life in captivity, given what he had done. Fusako's family, who had quietly monitored the trial, expressed satisfaction at the outcome. Most significant to them was something that had happened just before the sentencing. In a private statement, conveyed through prosecutors, Fusako had made a heartfelt request. When asked what she wanted for her abductor, the girl who had spent nearly a decade without sunlight replied that he should never be allowed to see the light of the sun again. It was her way of saying he should be locked away forever. The 14-year sentence handed down was not forever, but it was substantial. As one newspaper noted, that wish was partially granted by the court's decision. Sato, however, was not ready to accept his fate quietly. His defense appealed the sentence, arguing that it was too heavy. In October 2002, the Tokyo High Court surprisingly agreed in part and reduced the sentence to 11 years, reasoning that the lower court hadn't fully accounted for Sato's mental health issues. This reduction sparked public criticism. Many felt 11 years was far too lenient for stealing 9 years of a girl's life. Prosecutors appealed in turn, taking the case to Japan's Supreme Court, determined to restore the original punishment. On July 10, 2003, the Supreme Court issued its final ruling. The justices sided with the prosecution, reinstating the 14-year prison term for Nobuyuki Sato. Justice Takahisa Fukazawa, in his opinion, emphasized the severity of Sato's actions and the need for a punishment that reflected the gravity of the crime. With that, all appeals were exhausted. Sato would serve out his sentence behind bars. But Sato's story ended unexpectedly. After serving 14 years at Chiba Prison, he was released in 2015, having paid his debt to society, at least in legal terms. He faded into obscurity, a pariah with no family willing to welcome him back. Around 2017, Nobuyuki Sato was found dead in a modest apartment in Chiba City, apparently living out his post-prison life alone and in poor health. He died as he had lived much of his life, in isolation, darkness, and misery. When news of his death reached Nagata, it barely caused a ripple. For most, Sato had long been consigned to the past, and good riddance. The story of Fusako Sano is often recounted in Japan as a tale of resilience and the enduring hope of a family. In the face of almost a decade of darkness, a young woman emerged, not defeated, but alive and determined to find her way in the world again. In the early 2000s, her saga led to changes in how missing persons cases are handled and improved coordination among law enforcement agencies, a lasting impact that may help prevent similar tragedies. Her name also became a cautionary tale about vigilance, a reminder that horrors can lurk behind the most ordinary doors, and that communities must not turn a blind eye to signs of trouble. For Fusako herself, the years since regaining freedom have been about rediscovering life's simple joys. She learned to laugh again, to trust a few people, to walk under the open sky without fear. Every step of progress, whether attending a soccer match or capturing a photograph of a blooming iris, it's been a testament to her quiet courage. Those who know her say she carries herself with a gentle spirit, as someone who has seen the worst of humanity, yet still finds beauty in small things. In a rare comment through an intermediary, Fusako once expressed gratitude for the support she received from everyone who never forgot her. In turn, people across Japan often cite her story as an inspiration, proof that even after unspeakable suffering, there can be healing and hope. While nothing can return the lost years or fully erase the trauma, Fusako Sano's journey from captive to survivor stands as a powerful narrative of human endurance. It is a story that begins with a nightmare but ends with a hard-won dawn. As the world learned when she stepped forward and spoke her name in that hospital corridor, the light of hope was never truly extinguished for Fusako. It only had to wait, shining quietly, for 9 long years of night. Thanks for joining me for this week's edition of Fridays with Tony. This week's story was pretty heavy on the unusual. Unusual that someone was able to hide a kidnapping in plain sight for 9 years, and sadly, unusual to be a story with a hopeful ending. There are far too few stories like this that don't end in tragedy. Once again, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Fridays with Tony. Take care.